Hi, beautiful people. I am going to be reading Pride and Prejudice chapter 2. Let's start now. Yeah, after a week spent in perfection of love and schemes of felicity, Mr. Collins was called from his amiable Charlotte by the arrival of Saturday. The pain of separation, however, might be all. Wait, let me look up this word. Allu- a- allevi- alleviated on his side by preparation for the reception of his bride, as he had reason to hope that shortly after his next return into Hertfordshire, the day would be fixed that was to make him the happiest of men. He took leave of his relative at Longbourn with so much solemnity as before wished his fair cousin health and happiness again, and questioned their father another letter of thanks. On the following Monday, Mrs. Bennet had the pleasure of receiving her brother and his wife, who came as usual to spend the the Christmas at Longbourn. Mr. Gardner was a sensible, gentlemanlike man, great, greatly superior to his sister as well as by nature as education. The Netherfield ladies would have had difficulty in believing that a man who lived by trade and within view of his own warehouses could have been so well bred and agreeable. Mrs. Gardiner, who was several years younger than Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Philip, was an amiable, intelligent, elegant woman and a great favourite with all her long-born nieces. Between the two elders and herself especially, between subsisted a very particular regard. They had frequently been staying with her in town. The first part of Mr. Gardner's business on her arrival was to distribute her present and describe the newest fashions. When there was done when this was done, she had a less active part to play. It began it became her turn to listen. Mr. Bennet had many grievances to relate and much to complain of. They had all been very ill used since she last saw her sister. Two of her girls has been on the point of marriage, and after all there was nothing in it. I do not blame Jane, she continued, for Jane would have got Mr. Bentley if she could. But Lizzie, oh sister, it's very hard to think that she might have been Mr. Collins' wife by this time. It had not been for her own perverseness. He made her an offer in this room, and she refused him. The coincidence of it is that Lady Lucas would have a daughter married before I have, and that Longbourn estate is just as much entailed as ever. But the Lucases are very artful people indeed, sister. They are all for what they can get. I am sorry to say it's all them, but so it is. It makes me very nervous and poorly to be out. Oh, let me look up this word. Toward so in own family, and to have neighbors who think of themselves before any to have neighbors, oh my goodness, I forgot where I am, and to have neighbors who think of themselves before anyone else. However, you're coming just at a time is the greatest of comfort, and I'm very glad to hear what you tell us of long sleeves. Mrs. Gardner, to whom the chief of this news have been given before in the course of Jane and Elizabeth correspondence with her, made her sister slight answer, and in compassion to her nieces turned the conversation. When alone with Elizabeth afterwards, she spoke more on the subject. It seems likely to have been a desirable match for Jane, said she. I'm sorry it went off, but these things happen so often. A young man, such as you describe, Mr. Bentley, so easily falls in love with a pretty girl for a few weeks, and when accidents separate them, so easily forgets her, that these sort of inconstances are very frequent. An excellent consolation, consolation in its way, said Elizabeth, but it will not do for us. We do not suffer by accident. It does not often happen that the interference of friends would persuade a young man of independent fortune to think no more of a girl whom he was violently in love with only a few days before. But that expression of violently in love was so hacked. Oh, let me look up. Hackneyed, so direful, so indefend, indefinite, and it gives me very little idea. It is as often applied to feeling that it gives me very little idea. It is as often applied to feelings which arise from an half an hour's acquaintance as to a real strong attachment. Pray how violent was Mr. Bentley's love? I never saw a more promising inclination. He was growing quite attentive to other people, wholly engrossed by her. Each time they met, it was more decided and remarkable at his own ball. He offended two or three young ladies by not asking them to dance, and I could speak to him twice myself without receiving an answer. Could there be finer symptoms? Is there not a general civility, that very essence of love? Oh, yes, of that kind of love which I suppose him to have felt. Poor Jean, I am sorry for her, because with her deposition, she may not get over it immediately. It has it has better have happened. She may not get over it immediately. Had better have happened to you, Lizzie. You have laughed yourself out of it sooner. But do you think she would be prevailed on to go back with us? Change of scene might be of service, but perhaps a little relief from home may be as useful as anything. Elizabeth was exceedingly pleased with this proposal and felt persuaded of her sister's ready, let me see this word, acquiescence, ready acquiescence. I hope, added Mr. Gardner, but no consideration with regards to this young man who influenced her. We live in so different a part of town. All our connections are so different. And as you know, we grow out so little that it is very improbable they should meet at all, unless he really comes to see her. And that is quite impossible, for he is now in the custody of his friend. and Mr. Darcy would no more suffer him to call on Jean in such a part of England. My dear auntie, how could you think of it? Mr. Darcy may perhaps have heard of such a place at Gracechurch Street, but he would hardly think a man's let me look up this word. Ablution enough to cleanse him from his impurities where he once entered and depend upon it. Mr. Bentley never stirs without him. So much the better. I hope they will not meet at all. But does not Jane corresponds with the sister? She will not be able to help calling. She will drop the acquaintance entirely. But in spite of the certainty in which Elizabeth affected to the place's point, as well as the still more interesting more of Bentley's being withheld from seeing Jane, she felt a solicitude on the subject which convinced her on examination that she did not consider it entirely hopeless. It was possible, and sometimes she thought probable, and that his affection might be animated, and the influence of his friends successfully combated by the more natural influence of Jane's attractions. Miss Bennet accepted her auntie's invitation, invite, invite, invitation with pleasure, and the Bentleys were no otherwise in her thoughts at that time than she hoped that by Caroline's not living in the same house with her brother, and she might occasionally spend a morning with her without any danger of seeing him. The gardeners, let me look up this word. Stay, stayed a week at Longbourn, and what with the Philippines and the Lucas and the officers, there was not a day without its engagement. Mrs. Bennet had so carefully provided for the entertainment of her brother and sister that they did not once sit to a family dinner. When the engagement was for home, some of the officers always made part of it, of which officers Mr. Wickham was sure to be one, and of these occasions Mrs. Gardiner, rendered suspicious by Elizabeth's warm commendation of him, narrowly observed them both, without supposing them from what she saw to be very seriously in love. Their preferences of each other was plain enough to make her a little uneasy, and she resolved to speak to Elizabeth on the subject before she left Hertfordshire, and represent to her the imprudence of encouraging such an attachment to Mr. Gardiner, Miss to Mrs. Gardiner. Weekend has one means of affording pleasure unconnected with his general powers. About 10 or a dozen years ago, before her marriage, she had spent a considerable time in that very much of Derbyshire to which he belonged. They had therefore many coincidences in common, and though Mr. Wickham had been a little there since the death of Darcy's father 5 years before, it was yet in his power to give her fresher intelligence of her former friends. than she had been in the way of procuring. Mr. Gardner had seen Pemberley and known the late Mr. Darcy by character perfectly well. Here Constance Lee was an inexhaustible subject of this discourse. In comparing her collection of Campbelly with the minute description which Wickens could give, but in bestowing her attributes of praise on the character of its late possessor, she was delighting both him and herself on being made acquainted with the present Mr. Darcy's treatment of him. She tried to remember something of that gentleman's reputed disposition when quite a lad, which might agree with it, and was confident at last, and she recollected having heard Mr. Fitz William Darcy formerly spoken as a very proud, ill-natured boy. Oh, guys, I'm done. Yeah, I'm done. I'm gonna read the next chapter tomorrow, and I'm so proud of myself for reading this. Yeah, I'm very proud. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. I'm gonna read the next chapter tomorrow. Bye bye.